AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Both President Trump and Governor DeSantis were in North Carolina on Saturday after the unsealing of the indictment against President Trump that we've been discussing all morning, as we were discussing all Friday. And you know what Trump said. We brought it to you, that this is Trump derangement syndrome taken to the next level, and recounting tried and true themes, that this is a group of people on the left and a regime on the left that believes the ends justify the means, including the weaponization of the federal government to target a foreign president, just as they did before he was a president, and just as they did when he was president. And reiterating that, remember the lesson here. The lesson is, I'm what stands between you and them. If they can do this to me, then they can do it to anybody. Ron DeSantis echoed a similar sentiment, but without invoking the Trump name.
And what happens is, when there's no constitutional accountability, our founding fathers would have absolutely predicted the weaponization that we've seen with these agencies, particularly Justice and FBI. Because when you don't have constitutional accountability, human nature is such that they will abuse their power. And that's what's happened. Nobody has held them accountable. And, you know, look, when I was in Congress, I remember, Hillary had the emails with the classified. And my view was, well, gee, as a naval officer, if I would have taken classified to my apartment, I would have been court-martialed in a New York minute. And yet they seem to not care about that. And is there a different standard for a Democrat Secretary of State versus a former Republican president? I think there needs to be one standard of justice in this country. Let's enforce it on everybody and make sure we all know the rules. You can't have one faction of society weaponizing the power of the state against factions that it doesn't like.
Well, that's what everybody says they believe, but half the country cheerleads when they see President Trump indicted in Manhattan, indicted in Miami,
tomorrow, yep.
Indicted in Atlanta. That's a preview.
2 indictments. I mean, it's never going to stop.
For more on this and other topics, including what's happening on college campuses, there's been quite a bit, particularly at City University of New York campuses. Pleased to be joined by former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker and now CEO of Young America's Foundation. Governor Walker, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan, Amy. Good to be with you.
So that op-ed that you penned in the Wall Street Journal last week, we discussed on the show. I thought it was quite good. Your lessons learned from your run for president when you were coming off 2 terms as a successful governor and were very popular among the conservative grassroots, myself included. You were my candidate for president in 2016, coming out of the gate. And, you talked about being captured by the consultant class and playing it safe. Was that message that you delivered in that op-ed, was that specifically directed at Ron DeSantis?
Well, it applied to anyone in the race, including President Trump, but I think you're right. It's particularly of interest to Governor DeSantis. He and I, probably out of any of the candidates in the race, have the most similarities. A popular 2-term governor, someone who got national attention because of the aggressive actions that we took. My mistake, as you alluded to, and it's odd because all throughout my career up until that point, I defied the consultants. I defied logic. I not only ran in a blue state, Wisconsin, and turned it at least temporarily purple. Before that, I'd been the Milwaukee County executive, which is about 2, almost 3-to-1 Democrat, and no consultant would have told me to run there. So my big mistake, and the message I pass on, whether it's Governor DeSantis, whether it's Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, Tim Scott, you name it, is that big ideas, bold ideas, trump a bold record. That the record just gets you to the stage. But now you've got to deliver. Now you've got to take the next step. People loved what we did in Wisconsin. and for that matter, why I said it applies to President Trump as well. People love what he did, but if he's going to be the nominee or any of these other people are going to be the nominee, they got to tell them not what happened in the past, but what is going to happen over the next 4 years if you elect me. That's a powerful message.
Well, one thing I think DeSantis is missing out on, I mean, after the hurricane, he built that temporary bridge to Sanibel Island in about 2 weeks. I mean, he did an amazing job. And that's when a lot of people, I think, in Florida, like, I know they woke up because of COVID, but they really supported him after that. And I think he should tout on those accomplishments a little bit more. Or is that focusing too much on the past?
No, he should go to Pennsylvania.
That's what I thought yesterday. I'm like, you could build that bridge.
And literally, you build a bridge to the future. So this is a good example of where you connect the dots. You say, hey, look what I did in Florida, not just look in the past, but this is the kind of things I and my administration will do if given a chance. We'll come in and, forget about this nonsense the governor of Pennsylvania is saying this is going to take months.
Years.
Ron DeSantis can say, I built this in weeks. When people need transportation, we got to get it done. I think people, by and large, want limited government for sure, but the government that exists should work. And that's the problem with the left. They not only want big government, the government they had just doesn't work.
Yeah, the slight critique I have of your op-ed and what I think DeSantis has missed out of the gate, even though like the arguments like he made that you just heard in North Carolina on Saturday are why I like him so much, is because he is very thoughtful and very measured, and he makes arguments. He just doesn't take positions. He's an explainer, which brings people along. But he hasn't answered the why question. And that's it. I get bold ideas, but you first have to tell people why it is you're in this race. Like, who are you doing this for? Because particularly against Trump, he has, 40 to 50% of the electorate, Republican primary electorate, believing this guy is doing this for me. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't care about cocktail parties inside the Beltway. He is fighting the people who are making my life more difficult on my behalf, and that's why he's doing it, and that's why I'm sticking with him. And that's going to be very tough to dislodge.
Oh, I agree. I take it a step further. I think the most powerful moment I've seen for President Trump in the last few months was when he went to West Palestine, Ohio, after the train derailment.
Yeah.
And he showed up with, remember, all the water, the pallets of cleaning supplies. He took all the first responders to McDonald's. But most importantly, the national press totally ignored this. I wrote an op-ed in my weekly column for the Washington Times about this. I went and looked at all the local newspapers. You know what the caption was repeatedly? Was, "You are not forgotten." Joe Biden was in Europe. Pete Buttigieg was nowhere to be found until after Trump came there. Trump came and said, "You're not forgotten." That is a powerful message, not only in Ohio next to a train derailment. That's a powerful message around the country. Now, Ron DeSantis, again, he's got to figure out what his message is. But I'll give you an example. When I ran throughout not only my initial election, but particularly in the recall, I kept telling people there are two reasons why I was focused on making the tough decisions. One was named Matt, the other was Alex. Those are my two sons. I wanted them and every other child in that generation to grow up in a state at least as great as the one I grew up in. And to me, I think if I'm DeSantis, look at those kids. He's got wonderful kids. Make the case that America is not the America he grew up in, and we got to get it. We got to go forward with an America that restores those kind of fundamental values, not just on the economy, but on culture and everything else combined. That is a powerful message as well.
So,
I mean, but if you're running against Trump this cycle, I mean, you have to admit that this is really complicated for the people challenging him, because these indictments, just regardless of the merits, particularly on the one that was unsealed on Friday, regardless of the merits, it just smacks of everybody is out to get him, and he is standing athwart them on our behalf. And every time they do something like this, where they reach, where there is legitimate suspicions about motivations as well as evidence, it just further buttresses his standing. So what do you do?
Yeah, the media,
what do you do?
The the national media hasn't gotten this for years, and that is that they assume that everyone, every Republican, every supporter of Donald Trump supports everything he does. And he said, no, there are plenty of us who occasionally don't care for a tweet or a statement or comment, but it's like a family. And Donald Trump's under attack. I think DeSantis is right. I wrote about this the other day as well, that I just think there are millions of Americans who understandably feel there's two kinds of systems of justice in America. You know, when prosecutors fail to go after Hillary Clinton with her private server, or for that matter, Joe Biden and finding boxes of classified documents from his time as vice president in his garage next to his Corvette. I think most people that are just slightly right of center say, hey, wait a minute, this is an unfair justice system out there. And when that happens, you tend to rally around the person who's being persecuted, who's being attacked, who's being unfairly treated. That's the challenge. My advice, whether you agree with it or not, is I think DeSantis and the others have to spell out the reason they're running, the boldest agenda possible, and then make the case why not only they got a bold agenda, but that they're going to enact it. And because that's the advantage Trump's got, is people know he's going to do what he says he's going to do, but make the case that you not only have a bold plan, but that you can do it, and then make the case that you're the best to defeat Joe Biden. The only person who can change a voter's mind about Donald Trump is not the candidates, it's not a consultant, it's not an ad agency, it's Donald Trump. Donald Trump can make people who disagree with him maybe lean towards him again, or people who agree with him go the opposite direction. I would stay away from talking about Donald Trump if I was one of the candidates.
Really, that's interesting because, I thought that Vivek Ramaswamy had a pretty good tack over the weekend, and Vivek has been as aggressive as anybody, certainly as aggressive as DeSantis, and those two, I think, have been the most aggressive candidates in their own ways. But Ramaswamy comes straight away and says, look, he's a Yale law guy. I mean, he understands the case here, and he made a legal argument, but he also made sort of a normative political one and said, look, if I'm elected, I pardon Donald Trump. Take Donald Trump out of the equation because he's not going to jail if Vivek Ramaswamy is president. This was because of the two systems of justice that a lot of the candidates are saying. But here's the thing, what we're calling the difference between me and Trump is judgment. I wouldn't have used the same judgment that he used to get into this predicament in the first place. And that's what really the difference is. It's judgment calls so that we don't get sidetracked on things that are marginal. We don't get into food fights that are not productive. We focus on the big things that we have to do for those forgotten men and women that are so attached to Donald Trump. I thought that was a pretty good play from Vivek.
Yeah, I see merit in that. I just think the problem in all this is you're still talking about Donald Trump as opposed to saying, here's what we should be talking about. Here's the issues that everyday Americans care about. Yeah, you got to acknowledge, like I said, the scales of balance are tipped clearly away from those on the left and put entirely onto people disproportionately on people on the right. I'm going to fix that system. But here's, in the larger scheme of things, here are the things that people care about. Here's my plan. Whether people agree with Donald Trump or not, in 2015 and 2016, everybody knew he was going to build the wall, drain the swamp. All those sorts of things were clear things that you heard at the rallies, you heard at the debates, you heard over and over again, and all the rest of the candidates had to respond to that. If you're someone other than Donald Trump, you got to figure out what are those ideas that will capture the imagination of primary and caucus voters and get out and hammer those away and start being identified, as opposed to always responding to whatever it is the media is asking about Donald Trump.
Do you think he's going to get a fair trial in Miami?
No, I don't think he gets a fair trial anywhere. I mean, I think look at the case in New York City. Again, I tend to agree with the previous assessment. I wouldn't have put myself in those circumstances, but he is. In New York City, New York State, they literally changed the laws so that they could have a case to go after him to try and punish him. What they don't realize, though, is people can see through that. In this day and age where we don't have to rely on just the New York Times or the network nightly news to tell us what's going on, people can see how out of control this is. And it's just backfired on them. Every time they go after him with one of these indictments, his poll numbers go up. if they don't want him to be the next president, the best thing the left could do is just let him be and focus on their own agenda. But they can't do that because they've got Joe Biden as their candidate. And the only reason people on the left will vote for Joe Biden is because he's not Donald Trump.
If it was me, just from an operative perspective, one of the things that I would consider if I was working for DeSantis or Vivek or whoever, I'm not working for anybody, is Trump is probably at his apex right now with respect to Republican primary voters. And I wonder what his numbers are in suburban Milwaukee. I wonder what his numbers are in suburban Charlotte. I wonder what his numbers are in suburban Phoenix. And if right now, even though the national numbers are one thing and the national number versus Biden is one thing, if his numbers in those suburban areas, in those swing states, suburban Atlanta, too, throw that in there, if they're bad right now, if they're worse than DeSantis, for example, in a matchup with Biden or Newsom, that may be something I would be touting. And I'm not saying they are. I don't know, but I have my suspicions. That'd be something I'd be touting right now to say this is at his best, and he can't win those areas, so he can't win those states, so we can't win the election. And this is the way I start talking about electoral viability, even though the matchups nationally, if you just look at it at a macro level, DeSantis and Trump are about the same in a matchup versus Biden. Maybe that's a way to start peeling people off or at least questioning.
Well, right. It's the three things. You got to tell that case why you're running, why you got a bold plan and how you're going to do it, and then how you're going to win, how you're the candidate that can beat Joe Biden. And what you're saying is a big part of that. Now, the interesting element of that is go back to that example I gave at the train derailment. That Donald Trump, the guy we saw months ago, telling them they're not forgotten, that candidate, that response, that image actually does well in the suburbs of Milwaukee, in the suburbs of Columbus, the suburbs of Philadelphia. I believe, again, I wrote about this as well at the time, that the Manhattan District Attorney went after Donald Trump, and he decided, because remember, he said he was going to when he ran. He didn't do it for a while. I believe that he and his team saw how Donald Trump was starting to be perceived because of that and went after them. And I think part of it was, sadly, it's a horrible thing to say in light of how politicized this office is, but I believe they decided they wanted to distract and take attention away from that kind of a Donald Trump, because that's the Donald Trump who won in 2016 and could win again.
He is Scott Walker, former Wisconsin governor, president and CEO of the Young America's Foundation, Scott, helping conservatives on college campuses, and they need all the air support they can get. Scott Walker, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to